The receptionist at the Rideau Family Health Center hesitated when I handed her Leo's health card. She looked at the screen, looked at me, and then looked at the screen again. "Can you give me one moment?" she said. "I need to get someone." That pause, the careful tone, the way she turned the monitor just slightly away from me, told me something was already wrong before anyone said a word. "My name is Tamara Doyle. I'm 31 years old. My husband, Glenn, died 19 months ago in a collision on the 401, just east of Kingston, on a Tuesday afternoon in February when our son Leo was 4.5, and I was still the kind of person who believed that the worst things happened to other families. I have spent the month since then learning, the hard way, that grief doesn't just live in the quiet evenings when you reach for a person who isn't there. Sometimes it lives in the people who decide your grief makes you manageable." My brother, Shane, was 3 years older than me and had always been the organized one. That was the word our family used, organized. He kept a whiteboard calendar in his kitchen, filed his taxes in February, and had driven the same reliable Subaru for 9 years. When Glenn died, Shane was the first one through the door. He handled the funeral home calls, drove me to the bank to deal with the estate paperwork, and sat with Leo in the living room so I could fall apart in private. I was grateful. I told him so, more than once. That gratitude turned out to be one of the more expensive things I ever gave him. What Shane didn't tell me, what I wouldn't find out until that Thursday morning at the clinic, when a stranger hesitated over my son's health card, was that for the previous 4 months he had been quietly building a case that I was unfit to raise Leo alone. I worked from home as a bookkeeper. 3 small businesses in the Kingston area trusted me with their monthly reconciliations, their HST filings, their payroll remittances. The work suited the life I needed, at the kitchen table by 9, done before Leo's school bus pulled up at 4. I logged every hour. I invoiced to the cent. I kept every email, every bank statement, every scanned receipt organized by date in folders that backed up automatically to the cloud, because that was simply how I worked. When you keep records for a living, the habit doesn't stop at 5 o'clock. It follows you home and sits in the corner of your life, and eventually, if you are very lucky, it saves you. Glenn's life insurance policy had paid out $240,000. Under the terms of the policy and his will, the money was placed in a trust for Leo, accessible when he turned 19 or for approved education expenses before that. I was named trustee. We also had a registered education savings plan, a RESPIC, that Glenn had started when Leo was born, now sitting at just over $42,000 with the Canada Education Savings Grant matched in. I was the plan subscriber. All of it was Leo's, held in my care until he was old enough to hold it himself. I didn't think about the money very much. I thought about whether Leo was eating enough, and whether the grief counselor I'd been seeing every other week was right that I was making progress. I thought about whether he had nightmares I didn't know about, and whether the sticker chart on the bathroom door was doing any good. I did not think about the trust or the RASIP as things anyone might want badly enough to do something about. Shane thought about them. His wife, Alicia, had never been comfortable with me. I used to think it was personality. She was the sort of person who found sentiment inefficient, and I had never stopped being sentimental. But she was pleasant to Leo on the surface, bought him birthday presents that were always just slightly too advanced for his age, and I told myself that was her version of warmth. After Glenn died, Shane started asking questions that I read as concern. How was I managing the paperwork? Was I overwhelmed? Did I understand how the trust worked? He offered to be added as co-trustee, just to help. I said I had it under control. He offered again a few weeks later, reframed as taking a burden off my plate. I said no, more firmly. I didn't think much of it at the time. People who want to help sometimes push. Then the questions shifted. Shane started mentioning my grief counselor, Dr. Sandra Enging at the Limestone Mental Health Clinic, in the tone people use when they're trying to make something ordinary sound clinical and worrying. He asked our mother once, within earshot of me, whether she thought I seemed stable. Our mother said she thought I seemed like a woman who had been through something terrible. Shane said he wasn't sure that was the same thing. Alicia said nothing and smiled and refilled her coffee. I noticed all of it and I filed it under difficult family dynamic, and I moved on. I was raising a 6-year-old on my own. I had less room than before for things I couldn't do anything about. I want to tell you the exact moment I should have understood what they were doing, because the moment was there and I missed it. It was a Sunday in January, 3 weeks before any of this broke open. Leo and I had gone to Shane and Alicia's place in Barhaven for Shane's birthday dinner. On the drive home, Leo fell asleep in his booster seat, and I carried him in and tucked him into bed and found, when I pulled off his coat, an Avengers sticker on the inside of his collar that I hadn't put there. A sticker from Alicia's fridge. I thought it was sweet. I told my friend Jody Bergeron about it the next morning, and she said it sounded sweet too. We were both wrong about what it was. What it was, I would later understand, was Alicia learning what Leo responded to. Learning the small things that made him trust a person, the same way you learn a building before you decide it can be taken. The Thursday morning I found out was supposed to be routine. Leo was starting grade 2 in September, and the school needed an updated immunization record, which meant I needed to transfer his file from our old Dr. Farrell, to the new health team we'd registered with after the old clinic reduced its patient list. I went to the Rideau Family Health Center to finalize the transfer and pick up the printed records. The receptionist hesitated. She came back with a woman named Christine, a patient coordinator, who sat down across from me with her hands folded and said, in the careful way people have when they are delivering news they didn't make, "Mrs. Doyle, there's a flag on your son's file. It came from the previous clinic. There's a letter attached that indicates there's an active legal proceeding regarding his guardianship, and the file has been marked as requiring dual consent for any transfers or updates until the proceeding is resolved." I looked at her for a moment. "What proceeding?" I said. Christine checked the screen. "A guardianship application. Filed with the Ontario Family Court." She read out the case number. The letter attached to the flag was authored by Dr. Farrell. It's dated March 3rd. I stayed very, very calm. Because I had processed enough financial documents in my life to know that when something is wrong, you don't show your hand before you understand the full picture. "Can I see the letter?" I asked. She told me she wasn't able to provide it directly. It was part of a legal submission, but that I was entitled to request it formally through my own legal channels. She was sorry. I could tell she meant it. I thanked her. I went to my car in the parking lot. I sat there for 9 minutes. Then I called Jody. "Something's wrong," I said. "I need you to come over tonight." She was there by 6. What I told her was everything I could piece together from that conversation and from the thing I did as soon as I got home. I called the Ontario Family Court intake line and asked whether a guardianship application had been filed naming me as a respondent. There was a pause while the person checked. Yes, there was. Filed February 28th. Applicant, Shane Douglas Doyle. February 28th. Dr. Farrell's letter was dated March 3rd. The letter that justified the application had been written 3 days after the application was filed. I wrote that down. I wrote down both dates. Then I pulled out my own records. Not because I'd known I'd need them, but because I always kept them. And I found the summary from Dr. Farrell's office of my wellness check on March 1st, 2 days after Shane filed. 1 day before the letter was apparently written. That summary, received as an automatic follow-up email from the patient portal, noted that I had attended the appointment, that I was managing grief appropriately, that I had a support network in place, and that no concerns were identified at that time. Dr. Farrell had seen me on March 1st and found nothing concerning. He had then written a letter to the court on March 3rd, claiming concern about my capacity to parent. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. I felt a grief that was different from the one I'd been carrying since Glenn died. It was smaller and colder, The grief of realizing that someone who had sat at your kitchen table and held your son and said whatever you need had been quietly making himself useful in a way that was meant to end with you. The grief of understanding that a person can love you in one hand and want what's yours in the other, and the two motions can be so close together that you don't see the seam. I let myself feel it for the length of one phone call to Jody, who listened and did not try to fix it, which was what I needed. Then I told her what I was going to do. The next morning, I called a family law lawyer named Lindsay Park, whose name I'd been given by a colleague who'd gone through a custody dispute the year before. I got a consultation that afternoon. I laid out the dates. She looked at the March 1st email summary and the March 3rd date on the letter and said, with the careful precision of someone who chooses words deliberately, "The sequence is irregular." She told me to get my hands on the actual letter through proper disclosure. She told me not to contact Shane until I understood the full scope of what had been filed. She told me to make copies of everything and keep them in more than one place. I already had. I have always kept things in more than one place. It's the job. The disclosure came through in a matter of days because Lindsay moved quickly. The letter from Dr. Farrell to the court read, in part, that I exhibited signs of prolonged grief response that may affect executive functioning, and that he had observed during recent appointments a pattern of difficulty with decision-making and follow-through. It recommended further psychological assessment before Leo's primary care arrangements were considered settled. There were two problems with that letter, and they were both visible to anyone who looked. The first was the date, March 3rd, 3 days after Shane filed. The second was the contents. My March 1st appointment summary, generated automatically by Dr. Farrell's own office and emailed to me through the patient portal, said nothing about difficulty with decision-making. It used the phrase coping adaptably. Whatever Dr. Farrell had observed between March 1st, when I was coping adaptably, and March 3rd, when I was suddenly struggling with executive function, had not been observed at any appointment. Because there was no appointment between those two dates. I drove to the new health center and asked to see Dr. Prue, who was Leo's new family doctor. I brought out my printouts. I sat in the exam room and laid both documents on the desk, the March 1st summary and the March 3rd letter, without telling her what to think. I just pointed at the dates. She read them without speaking. Then she read them again. These two documents were authored by the same physician within 48 hours, she said, and they describe the same patient in contradictory terms. Yes, I said. And the letter was submitted to a legal proceeding that was initiated before the letter was written. 3 days before, I said. She was quiet for a moment. When she looked up, her voice had changed, slower, more deliberate. I want to document this discrepancy in your file, she said. And I think you should know that what you're describing is the kind of thing the College of Physicians and Surgeons would want to hear about. She made a note. She handed me a copy. I added it to the folder. That evening, Leo came home from a playdate at Shane and Alicia's, a playdate I hadn't known about until Shane texted me that afternoon, saying he'd picked Leo up from a neighbor's house without asking me first, and Leo was quiet at dinner in the way children are quiet when something is on their mind, and they can't find the words for. I didn't push. I cut his pasta into smaller pieces and I waited. Halfway through dinner, he said, "Uncle Shane says I might get to go to a new school next year." I kept my hand still on the table. Did he? I said. He said it might be closer to their house. Leo looked at his pasta, and Alicia picked out a duvet for a room. She showed me a picture. It had hockey sticks on it. I looked at my son. He was 6 years old. He had done nothing but believe an adult, which is the only thing a child that age knows how to do. "What do you think about that?" I said. He shrugged. "I want to stay in my school. Miss Lalonde is nice." "I know," I said. "Me too." I made sure my face didn't change. I asked if he wanted more pasta. He said yes. I gave him more pasta, And after he was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and added the date and Leo's exact words to the notes I'd been keeping, because I had learned by now that the small things are often the things that matter most, and that a 6-year-old telling his mother about a hockey stick duvet at 7:15 on a Wednesday is the kind of small thing a court would want to know about. Alicia made her mistake 10 days later. I don't think she meant to. I think she was already so certain of the outcome that she had stopped being careful. She sent me a text, just me, not the family group chat, with a photo attached. The message said, "Thought you might want to see. We want Leo to feel comfortable with us." The photo was of a bedroom in their Barhaven house, a single bed with a navy duvet, a bookshelf, a desk with a reading lamp. On the wall, in wooden letters she had painted and mounted herself, Leo. Not Leo Parrish, not Leo anything, just his first name on their wall in their house already finished. The text was dated March 11th. The guardianship application had been filed February 28th. That bedroom existed before a single judge had seen a single page of evidence. Leo was the thing they had already moved, in their minds, to make the story true. I looked at that photograph until my hands stopped shaking. Then I saved it and put it in the folder. My parents were harder to figure out than my brother, and that was the part I spent the most time sitting with. My mother, Janet, had been well-meaning my whole life, the kind of mother who worried out loud and meant it as love. She had told Shane, I later learned, that she was concerned about how I was coping. She had told him, in their private calls, that I seemed distracted, that I forgot things sometimes. She had meant it as a mother worrying about a grieving daughter. Shane had written it down and used it to round out the picture he was drawing of a woman who couldn't manage. My father, Douglas, had believed the easier story, that Shane was being responsible, that someone needed to step up. He had said to me once, back in January, in the context of the RESP, "Shane just wants to make sure everything's looked after properly." I had told him everything was already looked after. He had nodded in the way that meant he didn't quite believe me. They were not bad people. They had handed a careful, organized man exactly the details he needed, wrapped in their love for me, and they had not understood what he was going to do with it. That distinction would matter later, more than I expected. My mother called to suggest a family dinner before the court date. She said she wanted everyone to sit down together. I said I would come. I drove to my parents' house in Bath on a Sunday evening with the folder under my arm. When I walked in, Shane was already at the table with Alicia beside him. My father was at the head of it. My mother was at the stove. It looked exactly like every family dinner of my life, and the familiarity of it made something in my chest hurt in a way that was not anger. Shane stood when I came in, wearing the expression of someone who had decided they were being reasonable. "Let's just talk about this," he said, "before the lawyers make it worse." I sat down. I put the folder on the table. "All right," I said, "let's talk." I laid the two documents side by side first. The March 1st summary. The March 3rd letter. I explained the dates the same way I explain a financial discrepancy to a client. Here is what was recorded, here is what was submitted, here is the gap between them. I did not raise my voice. I had spent nearly 2 years learning how to stay in a room with a hard feeling without running from it, and that practice arrived exactly when I needed it. "Dr. Farrell saw me on March 1st, I said. His own system notes said I was coping well. His letter to the court, dated March 3rd, says otherwise. You filed on February 28th. The letter justifying the filing didn't exist until after you filed." Shane opened his mouth, then he closed it. Alicia said, "Dates get mixed up. That's a clerical issue." I set Dr. Prue's documentation on top of the other two. "My new doctor documented the discrepancy independently," I said. "She also noted it to the college. That's not a clerical issue. That's a physician writing a letter to support a legal filing that his own records contradict." I paused. He saw me on March 1st and wrote that I was fine. He wrote to the court on March 3rd and said I wasn't. There was no appointment in between. So what did he observe? The room was very still. I laid Alicia's photo down last, the bedroom, the wooden letters on the wall. You sent me this on March 11th, I said. The application was filed February 28th. You were already decorating a room for my son before a single judge had read a single page. I looked at Shane. You weren't waiting for a court to decide. You had already decided. Leo was the thing you moved to make the story look right. And the story needed me to look broken, so you found someone to say I was, after the fact. My mother turned from the stove slowly. She was looking at Shane. You told me she was forgetting things, she said quietly. Everyone forgets. You told me you were keeping notes, she said. Her voice had changed in a way I hadn't heard before. About what I told you, you said you were worried about her. She paused. I thought that's what this was. Shane didn't answer. My mother looked at me. She looked at the folder. She looked at her son. Then she sat down at the table, and I watched her understand what she had been part of, without knowing it. I turned to my father. You told me Shane just wanted to make sure everything was looked after properly, I said. I think that was true. He did want to make sure. The RSP is $42,000. The trust is $240. The trustee and the plan subscriber is me. That's what he wanted to look after. My father looked at his son for a long time. The silence where a defense should have been said more than a defense would have. Alicia tried once more. The money is significant. Someone needs to be responsible. I am responsible, I said. I have been responsible for 31 months. Every CCB deposit accounted for. Every RESP contribution on schedule. Every pediatric appointment kept. Every school pickup. The records exist. I gathered my pages. This isn't a family conversation anymore. It stopped being one the day a letter was written to a court, 3 days after you filed, claiming things that the March 1st appointment summary directly contradicts. My lawyer has everything. The college has the discrepancy. If you want to talk about Leo, you talk to Lindsay. I stood. I picked up my folder. My father said my name once, quietly. I looked at him. He looked like a man who had trusted the organized son, and was only now, too late, doing the arithmetic. I'm not cutting you out, I said. Either of you. But how you see my son goes through me from now on. That's not a punishment. That's just how it is. I drove home. Jody met me at the door. She looked at my face and said, kitchen or couch? Kitchen, I said. I haven't eaten. She made toast. We sat at my table and I told her what had happened, and by the time I finished the folder was on the counter, and Leo was asleep down the hall, and the house was quiet in the good way, after a long time of bad quiet. The guardianship application was dismissed 6 weeks later. My lawyer presented the documentation, the sequencing, the discrepancy, Dr. Prue's report. An application filed 3 days before its own supporting evidence existed is not an application that survives scrutiny. Shane withdrew before a full hearing. I heard about it in 3 sentences from Lindsay, and I felt no victory, only a tired, clean relief. Dr. Farrell was the subject of a complaint to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. Dr. Prue had already initiated that process when she documented the discrepancy. I don't know the outcome, that was never mine to carry. The RESP stayed where it had always been. The trust stayed where it had always been. I remained sole trustee and plan subscriber, as Glenn had intended and as Leo deserved. My mother came to my door 3 days after the dinner, with nothing in her hands but an apology. She didn't perform it. She sat at my kitchen table and said she was sorry in the simple way. I handed him things I didn't know he was going to use, and I should have asked more questions. I know you didn't know, I said. That's not the same as not being responsible, she said. It was the most honest thing she had said to me in years. I told her so. My father took longer. He was a man who had trusted the wrong child and didn't know how to say it plainly. He showed up a week later with a box of the Timbits Leo liked, the chocolate-glazed ones, and sat on the porch and asked if he could see Leo. I said he could for an hour at my house, with me present. He said that was fair. He ate one and gave Leo the rest and didn't say much. But he came. That was the beginning of something, even if it was a small beginning. Shane and Alicia I have not seen since the dinner. There has been no apology from that direction. There probably won't be. I have left that door closed, not locked, because Leo will one day be old enough to make his own decisions about who his uncle is. That's not my call to make for him. My job is to keep him safe now, and to make sure the story he grows up with is an honest one. Leo went back to school in September, in the same building, with Miss Lalonde. On the first day, I walked him to the classroom and updated his emergency contact card in person at the office, with the secretary watching, because I had learned that there is no detail too small when it comes to paperwork that concerns your child. His file shows one authorized pickup: me, my phone number, my address, my signature. He asked me once, about 2 months after it was all over, why Uncle Shane didn't come to his birthday party. I told him that sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, and that it didn't change how much Shane had once cared about him, and that the people who came to his birthday party were the people who always showed up. He seemed satisfied with that. He went back to his cake. I kept seeing Dr. Ng. I'm not going to pretend that any of this was easy, or that the right documents make the grief smaller. They don't. What they do is give you ground to stand on while you work through the rest of it. Shane had tried to make my counseling into evidence of instability. It had been, the whole time, the opposite. Evidence that I had decided, in the year Glenn died, that I was going to do this as a whole person and not a hollow one. The most radical thing a grieving widow can apparently do is refuse to break on schedule, and then show up anyway, every other week, to a quiet office, to do the hard work of staying whole for her child. I am a bookkeeper. I log hours and file receipts and back everything up in 3 places because that is how I do things, and it has always been how I do things. It turns out that habit is not just professional diligence, it is, if you need it to be, the record of a life. Someone can file a letter. Someone can decorate a bedroom and paint a child's name on the wall in someone else's house. Someone can stand in a kitchen and tell a family that you are struggling, and if they are organized and credible and have known you your whole life, some people will believe them. But you cannot forge a 31-month record of showing up. You cannot backdate a Canada Child Benefit history or manufacture a pediatric appointment log or create, after the fact, the February Tuesday, when you drove Leo to his flu shot in the sleet because the appointment was on the calendar and you keep your appointments. No one can stamp their name onto the mornings. They were mine, the record says so. Leo asked me last week if we could get a fish. He wanted a blue one because blue is his favorite color. We went to the pet store on Saturday and he picked a small blue betta and named it Rocket, which is not a fish name, but it is his fish and his name, and he was very certain about it. We put the tank on his dresser, by the window. Before he went to sleep that night, he checked that the light was on and the filter was running, and then he looked up at me from under his duvet. The one from this house, from me, and he said, "Good night, Mom." "Good night," I said. I turned off the lamp. The tank light stayed on, a small blue glow in the dark. That is the document that cannot be altered. I was there for it. I am always there for it. And my son knows it.